have been doing a lot of great work out here. And so what I was thinking when I was asked to present today, that I would talk about something that you might not be familiar with. So I'm looking at a project as a case study for you all to introduce to you what we're doing in the field related to environmental justice. And at the end of the presentation, I'll bring it back as to why I think it's important for this region. So let's see. So what is environmental justice? Environmental justice is the fair treatment. I'm using the EPA's definition for now, but the state of California also has their own definition. So environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental health and hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. So this is where we get into the civil rights, where it's equal protection under the law and the same degree of environmental protection. And this comes to play in Ceqa and environmental planning in your communities. So what I did here is just wanted to give you kind of just a run through showing that the federal law has come to fruition under President Bill Clinton in 1994. He signed Executive Order 12898, which kind of said about that definition that's even persisting on the EPA's website through this administration. 1997 policy and guidance document that incorporates environmental justice into the NEPA process. And then all federal agencies and policies are bound by this executive order. So every agency in the federal system has to comply with this environmental justice order. And then in California, we have also incorporated the environmental justice laws, and we also cite EO 12898 in our environmental laws in California. So we have, our code is 65040.12. We adopted in 2013, speaks directly to the environmental justice, and even as recent as Senate Bill 1000 talks about environmental justice in our communities in 2016, and we even have an expanded definition of environmental justice just this year. And also it's important to know that we talk about this in the general plan. Our general plans have to incorporate environmental justice in them right now. Also, as of 2012, we have Senate Bill 535, which looks at disadvantaged communities. And the state has mapped these disadvantaged communities using Cal EnviroScreen, and that falls under, we look at these disadvantaged communities when we're looking at AB 32, cap and trade funds, who's going to receive those funds, etc. So this disadvantaged communities in the Cal EnviroScreen is really important for you to find out who are the disadvantaged people in the communities, and whose voice do we need to hear from? Who are the people that we haven't really heard from? So it's kind of going to diversify how much input we receive in some of our the projects and different policies that are being enacted. So today's case study, I thought would be interesting to share with you this case that was brought forth with the help of the Center for Biological Diversity. It's called the Youth for Environmental Justice, South Central Youth Leadership Coalition, along with the Center for Biological Diversity. And they sued the City of LA, the City of Los Angeles Department of City Planning, and the Director of the City Planning Department. This case is still not wrapped up, but I think it's important for you to understand what can happen here. So sorry the font is small. There was quite a bit to share here. Also, my slide presentation will be available for you all after today's session. So what happened in this case was they started looking at this unequal protection. What was happening was in the Wilmington and South LA, there was oil wells being that had been established that were diesel-powered drilling rigs that were adjacent to homes, apartments, a little league field, a high school for developmentally disabled youth, a clinic for HIV patients, and a playground. So we're looking at sensitive receptors, we're looking at young people who are developing, so we're having, a major environmental impact due to oil drilling in downtown LA region. And then they started citing these oil derricks hundreds of feet closer to sensitive areas than they did in the West LA and Wilshire areas. So here we have oil drilling in Los Angeles region, and we have a different process happening between people that are in the city proper and then some of the other cities outside in the west side in the Wilshire area. And it's important to see, again, with the environmental justice, that in the Wilmington and South LA areas, we have 70 to 90% of those individuals identify as Latino or African American. And that information that's demographic data available on the census data. And then the west side and the Wilshire communities identify 40 to 80% of them self-identify as white. So you can already see that the disparity in how we're treating these individuals in Wilmington and South LA are already starting to emerge. So what they did with the derricks in the Wilmington area is they put 30 feet sound walls on 3 sides of the derricks with acoustical blankets on the exterior of the rig floor. But in the west side Wilshire neighborhood, they fully enclosed the derricks with an acoustically treated soundproof structure. So they've managed the same type of project completely differently. And then we have some other things, like we have a 6 to 12 feet wall around the drilling site in the Wilmington area, and then in the west side of Wilshire area, they use 12 to 25 feet walls around the drilling site. Then they added some extra environmentally, so they gave some mitigations to the west side area that they did not give to the downtown LA. They gave them setbacks that were landscaped with lawn, ivy, or other green cover, planted with trees and shrubs to be maintained in a first-class, attractive conditions at all times. That was in their policy at the city of LA. So there's a lot of things cited in the lawsuit, and I actually have the case attached here on the screen. So what are the impacts from drilling activities? There's deterioration of air quality, as you all know, due to odor and quantifiable increases in air emissions. There's possible groundwater contamination, risk of fire from highly flammable materials, long-term exposure to adjacent residents to potentially toxic air. We have noise impacts from construction, plus probably noise impacts from drilling. Increased local traffic, increased light and glare, and impacts of aesthetics and views from adjacent residential areas. So these are just some of the impacts that were noted in the case, which generated these types of illnesses: respiratory problems, asthma, pulmonary edema, and bronchitis, neurological symptoms such as drowsiness, vertigo, and headaches, cancer, skin and eye irritation, and the fact that children breathe at a higher rate, they drink more water and consume more food, placing them at a higher risk. Now, in the case, they talk about bringing in the EPA to kind of do an assessment of what's happening in the area. The EPA got sick doing the study, going on the site in the Wilmington area. So the EPA agents experienced neurological symptoms just doing a site inspection. So this is kind of an important topic. So I have some of the Ceqa process, but what happens in this planning agency process is that we've experienced unequal access to decision making. So what happened? So the city of LA has about 585 well sites. That's a lot of oil drilling that were active and proposed. So what their internal planning process did, which is why the director of the planning department was sued in this case, is because they decided that oil drilling is exempt from Ceqa, and they gave it a categorical exemption. So this really becomes important because in as much as Dr. Tim is talking about the process, the Ceqa process, and how important it is for us to engage in the public participation process and to be able to be, we're the experts of our immediate community. Many planners don't even live in the cities that they work. So we're the experts of our community. And if we don't have a voice, if we don't find out about the project, how can we speak up about it? And this is where the environmental justice issue comes in. Because if you don't know this process exists, and if you're not being told that this process exists, how are you supposed to participate and protect your local environment? So because they exempted these oil derricks and this whole process, there was no conditional use permit. There were no mitigations. There was no way to designate significant environmental impacts. There was no way to avoid them. The process was just eliminated completely. There was no public review. There was no responsible agency consultation or decision making. So South Coast Air Quality Management District was not informed. But here's an interesting fact that I thought was interesting in the case, is they did require one EIR, one time, on a drilling site near a predominantly white neighborhood. And they base it on a threshold of changing technology to improve the environmental quality. So what they had was diesel-powered drilling rigs, and they were going to convert that to electric-powered electric-powered oil rigs. So that change in their technology triggered an EIR. So and their EIR said that we were improving environmental quality. So I thought that was an interesting EIR that they did. So needless to say, there was no decision-making body and no notice of determination was filed with the state or clerk. So guess what? No one knew it was happening. So the importance, this is why I wanted to bring this case, because I know we talk a lot about the Ceqa process, but if the project is not following the Ceqa process, you won't know about it. You will not know about it. So it's good to keep an eye on things that are going on in your community and do some investigating and some sleuthing. So I kind of just highlighted a couple key things in the Ceqa process that are important for us to follow so that we can find out about some of these projects. But basically, I really wanted to highlight what was happening in Los Angeles. Why is this an important case out here in the desert? The Ceqa process itself, when followed by the state's guidelines and the flow chart as intended, it provides everyone the same protections and access. So the process is important, and it does follow, the environmental justice path. If we followed Ceqa to the letter of the law, we would have included most people in the community if they learned about this process, which you're all here doing today. Categorical exemptions provide a lead agency a method of evading public and environmental scrutiny. They must be cited accurately by section and submitted to the state clearinghouse. So the law sets up our exemptions. They're either statutory or categorical, and we have to cite those categories very specifically in our notice of exemptions. As a planner, my experience with other planners in the office, if you don't know the process, if you were taught taught on the job, taught by someone who doesn't have an environmental planning degree or has training in Ceqa, they may not see the importance, or that information may not have been passed on to the planner. So I did work with planners who kept telling me that projects were exempt. And I kept thinking, I don't think so. So I would take them back to my supervisor and show them. But these notice of exemptions were still not even being filed with the state clearinghouse because these particular planners had no idea that process needed to be followed through. I personally have seen this inside of a planning agency. So when I read this case, it resonated with me because the planners might not know the actual policy and the process. So it really does come back to the planning director's oversight. He should be training his planners to make sure that they're following the Ceqa process appropriately. So here's the thing about rubber stamping approvals through a zoning administrator. I don't know if I don't know if every city has a zoning administrator, but that's an administrative process. And as soon as you make a process administrative, they can tend to take that ministerial path where it's administrative instead of taking the environmental path, the Ceqa process. So it gets kind of it blurs the line. So we should be paying attention to what type of projects the zoning administrator is approving, who is the zoning administrator, and are they kind of steering clear of the Ceqa process if they're using the zoning administrator. And then to review the notice of exemptions for your area, you can go to the state clearinghouse. They use the NOE designation on the state clearinghouse website under the Office of Planning Research. But again, I'm telling you, just for your information, some planners don't file the NOEs. So this gets back to government. We think government's doing the job, but not everybody knows their job very well, and the process could be circumvented innocently or not. It depends on what's happening in those offices. And then two, look at other approvals, determinations, and trends. So in this lawsuit, they had to really dig deep into the process of the city planning office in Los Angeles. And they didn't really have a good process. They didn't have a file at all about these drilling rigs. They had no record of how they were managing these projects. So for us citizens, it's really hard to look at what's happening on the inside of a planning department. But the Center for Biological Diversity was they were pretty sleuthy. They figured out a way to ask different questions here and there, so they were able to do their get public records requests. But they had to be strategic in how they got those because it wasn't a very good record-keeping system. And sometimes we don't keep records very well so that we can hide things. So, I mean, these things happen. I'm not saying we, because it's not me, but we know that people do this on purpose. So I want you to pay close attention to what's happening in these planning departments. So look at other approvals and determinations in your area. How are they keeping record? What is important in their process? And maybe one of the biggest things I learned going to college, learning critical thinking, and going through Tim's classes and other classes is what are you not being told? What is missing? That's the biggest part of critical thinking, is what is not being written. in the EIRs or the environmental, or the initial studies. Let's see, citing projects near disadvantaged communities versus highly desirable neighborhoods. You know, we have some topics out here that have happened, the Eagle Mountain landfill. There's some other projects. We are citing things in areas that we think we can hide or people don't know. So it's interesting. And speaking of hiding, I'll tell you, I use a case study for my students that kind of resonate with them, and it's the Coachella Music Festival. So I decided that I was going to pull this EIR, and we were going to use it as a way to engage, that I would use it as a way to engage them. Well, so we started looking for this Coachella Music Festival EIR, Stagecoach EIR. We're looking for it, we can't find it. So as I'm looking through the documents, I see at the very small corner of a piece of paper, it says Golden Voice. So I said, let's take a look at this Golden Voice name. So then I started sleuthing for Golden Voice EIR. So the EIR was titled Golden Voice EIR for the city of Indio, and it's for the Coachella Stagecoach. So how many people you think commented on that project? They probably didn't even know what it was. So they used a whole different name to name the project. To me, as a way to stealth, I shouldn't say it like, I mean, I'm not trying to be negative, but I see it as a path to stealth the project and minimize public input. Perhaps that was not their intent, but I see it as such. Personally, we asked for a public records request to get the EIR. It took them about 35 days to get it to us after several requests. And the way they now analyzed the EIR was interesting. They based it on traffic patterns that are existing, but we know Coachella's been going on since the late 90s. So in its infancy. So instead of looking at all that data to show the progression of traffic, they didn't analyze it that way. So it's interesting to see how we move through this Ceqa process. And then one of the things that I think is really important to speak on the side of being the planner in the room at the time is that if we circumvent the Ceqa process, and we don't have people filing their projects and going through the EIR process or going through the initial study and getting the technical studies, if we don't have people paying for conditional use permits, we're not going to have a staff ready to actually conduct the process the way it should be. And I think that it's important that we hold our planning departments accountable for making sure that they're analyzing, identifying the projects, analyzing them according to Ceqa, the way it's meant to be, so that we can actually have the fees paid, because local governments are not, they're not making a profit. They have to operate, they have to balance their spreadsheet. It has to be, there's no profit to be made in government. So if you don't have enough people to do the project, or to do the work, maybe you're hiring consultants, maybe you're hiring people who are inexperienced. This is one that I use for my students. It's a layperson's guide to environmental impact documents. It's kind of easier for them to understand. It's not so complicated. And then this, the oil drilling lawsuit case study. And as of February 2019, the case is still winding its way through the courts, and the oil companies filed a countersuit against the youth, and the judge, the appellate court, turned them down, so they didn't have a countersuit. So the case is still going through, but I think this case really speaks to the planning process, having equal access to the information and equal protection under the law, so that you have a right to a clean and healthy environment, which comes back to Tim's significant findings findings of significant, mandatory findings of significance. The C, which said that everyone has a right to a healthy environment. And if you're not controlling that environment, it's an automatic, you're not mitigating for the health of the community. It's an automatic EIR. So you can see why they might circumvent that process if they didn't have to. So that's my presentation. I hope I taught